everyone. I'm Tracy. As Monica introduced, I am a software engineer, diversity activist, and the founder and CEO of Block Party, a tech startup building user-friendly tools for online safety and privacy. Later in the session, Deonne will join me on stage. We're here today to talk about how being online doesn't have to come at the cost of our safety and privacy. As humans, we deserve better. And as technologists, we have the power to do better. All right, let's get started. Here is our agenda. First, who cares? Who cares? Well, for starters, I do. Let me take you back in time about 5 years for a little personal history and context. This is a screenshot of my Twitter profile circa 2019. Obviously, I'm just showing this to you to humble brag that I was an OG blue check. Just kidding. But really, the blue check did mean something back then, which was that I had reached a certain level of notability, and that was mainly for my diversity and tech activism work. I had written a blog post called "Where Are the Numbers" that called out Silicon Valley's lack of transparency around their demographic data of their workforce, pointing out the hypocrisy of being a data-driven industry but carefully avoiding diversity data because it would look bad. My post went viral, and eventually the tech industry did publish its diversity data, showcasing how poorly we were doing and also how little we were improving. I became an accidental activist on the topic of diversity, and I frequently spoke on issues of gender, race, and how the relevance, quality, and impact of technology we built could only be improved by having more representation in the ranks of technology builders. We have reached a new level of backlash against DEI recently, but I can tell you from personal experience, 10 years ago through to now, there have always been people mad about DEI and quite nasty about it. So just a minor content warning before I progress to the next slide, some racism, misogyny, and violent imagery. Here is a tiny sample of the tweets I got on a regular basis. As someone who checks my phone compulsively, I know it's a bad habit and I should work on it, but I do. Walking between meetings, while brushing my teeth, in line at the grocery store, I would check Twitter all the time, and it really sucked that I could be hit with a virtual slap to the face at any moment, day or night. I tried to tough it out. People used to say, don't read the comments, don't feed the trolls. If I ever mentioned harassment I was getting, people would just ask, why don't you delete your account? It felt like people were telling me that it was my fault for receiving harassment because I wanted to be online, and it was my fault for caring about it when I didn't have to. Recognizing first how bad it had gotten for me and how much it was impacting my mental health. Second, how good the internet could be, though, and feeling sad about how much good I was missing out on. And third, that I, as an engineer and product builder, could build solutions to my own problems and those of many others. I started Block Party with that mission of making good on the promise of the internet. When the world started getting online, the internet promised to democratize information, connection, opportunity, and so much more. It hasn't quite lived up to that promise, and the past decade, especially 2016 onwards, has felt particularly bleak in some corners. Where we once thought everyone could have a voice and a presence, including the historically marginalized, we've been confronted with the reality that harassment is often used as a silencing tool. Where we once thought it would bring us joy and delight to find community and content online, we've often instead dealt with the harms of being addicted to and poisoned by the algorithms. That doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of good still online, but it comes with a lot of bad right now, and it's understandable that some folks are now making the trade-off to give it all up altogether. I think everyone deserves to be able to partake in digital prosperity, for fun and for work and everything in between. That's what we're working towards at Block Party. Ironically enough, as I began work on Block Party, my own online safety and privacy issues only escalated. For one, harassers don't like it when you build anti-harassment software. So every announcement about the company or product launches brought awful people out of the woodwork. They filled our wait list with abuse. They launched DDoS attacks to try to take down our website. Once a thread about me appeared on 4chan, and the 4chan trolls coordinated to create accounts with my name and photo to post hundreds of racist, horrible comments all over the internet. I also started having to worry about physical safety. It's uncomfortable to talk about any stalker, even a former stalker, because there's always the risk the obsession hasn't fully ended and they'll be back. But I also hate that we can't be more open in talking about these topics. I'm sharing my experience in the hopes that it helps to illuminate the types of challenges we face and hopefully start to address them. One very dedicated stalker developed a parasocial attachment to me and went from being overly aggressive online to getting on a plane, flying around the world, and trying to find me in person. Multiple times he showed up where I was. My mental health was bad before, but it reached a new level of terrible. I was paranoid whenever I was out on the street, wondering if he might be following me. I was paranoid whenever I was at home, wondering if he might have figured out where I lived and if he might tailgate someone into the building. Every night before signing off, I made a round of checking all of his public social media to see if there were any clues that I should be aware of and I should pay attention to for my own safety. Horrible bedtime routine, do not recommend. The worst part was the feeling of helplessness. It felt like everything was out of my control. I wanted to be at home writing code for Block Party, and instead I had to go to SFPD at the Hall of Justice to try to file police reports. They rejected my reports in the beginning. Even when I got through, they said they couldn't do anything. Meanwhile, my stalker wasn't stopping. I was furious, but also fearful. My whole life had been turned upside down just because one crazy person had fixated on me. I went to private security to see if they could help. Although private security was altogether too expensive for me, they wanted $3K a month on Rotator, more if any escalations happened, and that was more than I was paying in rent at the time. They gave me advice that has stuck with me to this very day. They'd seen a lot of people in my situation, and worse, and said this: the worst thing is the feeling of helplessness. The most important advice I can give you is that you aren't helpless. You can flip your mindset. Think proactively about how to defend yourself. This investigator suggested to me that I could think from the perspective of my stalker. Where might there be exposure of my data? What information could he get on me? What would that enable him to do? With that thought exercise, I could figure out what to lock down preemptively. They reminded me that I have agency and that I could exercise it. Remember this idea. We'll come back to it shortly. All right, so enough about me. Who else cares about privacy and safety? A common criticism of efforts in this space is that people actually don't care, so why bother? To address that misconception head on, a lot of people care. And to be more pointed about it, actually, it's a lot of people who say they don't, but really do. Before we get too much deeper, let's define some terms. To be clear, these are terms that industry people and legislators love, but normal people rarely use. Online safety is protection from the many different possible harms of being online, including harassment, exposure to disturbing content, disinformation, as well as attacks or breaches relating to your own data. Privacy is about that narrower set of concerns, specifically about how your data and personal information is collected, stored, used, and accessed, aka who can see it. Security delimits privacy in a way. It's primarily about ensuring that the policy around your data and privacy matches the reality. So whoever should not be allowed to access data is in fact not allowed. Right, so most people don't use those terms to describe their concerns. I've recently been interviewing a lot of customers to understand how they think about online safety and privacy. But instead of asking them outright, In those words, I asked them to describe how they use social media, any rules they have for their own usage, and what information they're sensitive about. What I hear from people is that they do care quite a bit about safety and privacy. Just like in the physical world, people are very conscious of how they move through spaces, how they show up, how others see them, and they have an underlying concern of staying safe and protecting themselves and the people and things that they care about. To share a specific example, a lot of women are careful not to share photos in real time or post anything that gives away physical location. This very notably comes at the cost of potential connection. For example, if you're passing through a city and there's a friend you would want to reconnect with, or maybe even somebody you can meet and collaborate with for work, you now miss out on making that connection by not publicizing that you'll be around. That choice to self-censor is a very deliberate, calculated one that ultimately prioritizes personal safety. The threats and risks these days of being online are bigger than ever because of the scale of the internet. Privacy and safety changes at scale. For example, it was normal a few decades ago to have a physical phone book of everyone who lived in a town or city. You can look up any person's phone number based on their name. But the number of people who had access to that phone book was, practically speaking, limited by geography. Nowadays, if your phone number is widely available, just the spam is unmanageable, not to mention what happens if a person or a group of people decides that they want to target you. Then you're in for a lot of headache. Global reach seems like a great thing when you're reaching people you want to reach, but the downside is that you're also potentially exposed to a wider group than you want to be. Human society has not evolved to handle this level of connectivity and the speed and volume with which information is spread and interactions happen. One of the surest signs that people care about these topics is that regulators care. When there is pressure from the populace to do something, lawmakers respond by putting legislation forward. Already 137 out of 194 countries have data and privacy legislation. A sample of them are denoted here by purple arrows on the map. Of course, they are not all the same and they implement different levels of rights, but the trend is unmistakably one of delineating more protections for people. Many of you have probably heard of GDPR, a landmark piece of data legislation from the EU. It's why you get so many "do you accept these cookies" banners when you use the European internet. Putting aside those mildly irritating cookie banners, which have not been a boon to usability, nor people's opinion of tech regulation, GDPR did achieve something remarkable, which was to completely change how companies approach storing user data. Instead of collecting everything by default, just in case it could be useful, companies are much more careful now about the potential liability. Safety legislation is a bit newer on the scene. Remember that safety covers a wider range of harms, so it's not surprising that privacy legislation came first, and now, a bit later, more comprehensive safety legislation is starting to appear. In the EU, there's the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act, the DSA and DMA, which just started coming into effect last summer and also this year. And Australia and the UK also both just passed online safety acts recently in 2021 and 2023, respectively. In the US, we are lagging on regulation, especially at the federal level, though not for lack of people being very mad about these issues. Some of you may recognize this image of tech company CEOs getting called in front of Congress to testify last month about kids' safety. Parents in the audience there held photos of their dead children while they implored lawmakers to do something. The Kids Online Safety Act still faces challenges to be passed, but in the meantime, while we're dealing with this federal gridlock, there's been a flurry of state social media bills. I don't think anybody actually really wants this patchwork of state legislation, but it is a signal at how much energy there is now towards doing something about this problem. That being said, I'm personally not a big fan of most of the proposed legislation that has been introduced. It feels like most media coverage and people's opinions are stuck in a false dichotomy that either A, platforms need to do better content moderation, or B, regulators need to force platforms to do better content moderation. The problem, though, lies in defining what should be allowed or not allowed. Nobody agrees. Spoiler, nobody agrees on this. Whether it's the platforms drawing those lines or governments attempting to do so. There is a third option, and that is users exerting their own agency and choice. Let's return to that idea that you aren't helpless. Even if there are a lot of things out of your control, fundamentally, you have agency. The solution to a lot of our social media problems, not all, but a lot, can be found in exploring that idea of user empowerment. Okay, it's going to get a little bit technical. A relatively new idea that's coming to the fore policy conversations is this concept of middleware, a layer of software that sits in between users and platforms and allows users to have more choice, to choose their own experience. Block Party used to operate a set of anti-harassment services on top of Twitter, which we now refer to as Block Party Classic, but used to just be known as Block Party. When the Twitter API, or application programming interface, was still open, it was possible for us to build a seamless alternate experience of timeline and feed for our users, filtering out all the spam and harassment from their mentions and allowing them to mass block. It's like how you wouldn't want to check your email inbox if it was mostly junk. We cleaned things out to make Twitter more usable and more pleasant for people opting into Block Party as middleware. This was not content moderation per se. That is, the platform taking down content it doesn't allow. Instead, it allowed users choice and control over what they saw. Sadly, Twitter ownership changes also meant we lost access to the API, and that product is on hiatus. Regulation that requires open APIs would allow us to bring it back, not subject to the whims of an erratic owner or shifting business trends and priorities. And in general, it would open up markets and consumer choice for social media experience across many different platforms. That being said, from a technical standpoint, there are other ways that middleware can be implemented, and I want to highlight the fact that there are actually a lot of tools that exist now for privacy and safety implemented in these other ways. These products are getting built often in spite of structural barriers and technical difficulties to meet user demand. Let's take a look at some of these examples of tools you can use to help you exercise your rights and express your preferences. The California Consumer Privacy Act and many other state laws since then give people the right to an authorized agent who can make data rights requests on your behalf. Permission Slip is a slick app from Consumer Reports that allows you to exercise that right easily. For example, to be able to request that companies ranging from Home Depot to Bumble delete your data. Delete Me helps you get your data removed from third-party data brokers and people search engines. Information like your address and phone number. Technically, you could submit these opt-out requests by yourself by writing emails to the hundreds of sites out there, but who has the time? Plus, you have to keep doing it because these data brokers and people search engines keep slurping up your data, and you have to keep requesting that they delete it. Privacy Party is a new product that we at Block Party are building. The concept came originally from talking to newsroom security teams that wanted to help their journalists stay safe online. In addition to getting a lot of harassment, journalists sometimes have to face threats like doxing, stalking, death threats. Personal social media creates a lot of surface area for vulnerability, so the security recommendation is always to lock things down. Going through settings on every social platform is confusing and a huge pain and a time suck, super tedious, and nobody wants to do it. So this is a problem for people in positions of high visibility, but it's also a problem for a lot of other folks too, who just want better boundaries online and are foiled by the terrible default UX of clicking through everything in settings. Maybe it's just that there are old party photos from college that you're still tagged in, or things you posted forever ago that might not stand up to scrutiny now. Or there are just parts of your personal life that you don't need your professional colleagues to have full access to. Those are just a couple of examples in a much broader landscape of privacy and safety tools, a safety tech ecosystem that is growing. This chart is not a comprehensive one by any means, but I want to show you a bit of the lay of the land. From the bottom, we have tools at the hardware device level, all the way up to the application level at the top of social media, gaming, and communications. From left to right, we have platform-native, first-party integrated solutions over to third-party solutions, alternative solutions on the right. These range from things like Apple and Google's built-in parental controls apps to alternative privacy-preserving browsers like DuckDuckGo and Brave, to tools like Permission Slip, Delete Me, and Privacy Party, which sit in that middle section and help users interact with platforms and companies more easily. The growing ecosystem of these tools is more proof that people do care about their privacy and safety. Another point here, though, is that even if people care, it has to be easy. Product design has to meet people where they are. It can't just be that legislation gives people more rights or platforms technically give people more controls if they're not usable. With that, let me now turn the stage over to Deonne, who will talk about what we can do as we build products. Great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deonne Castaneda, head of product design at Block Party. As Tracy said, people do want to protect their privacy, especially as the risks of being online continue to grow. But the user experience, or UX, of privacy needs to be much easier for people to feel safer and protected online. Let's take a look at the user experience of online privacy today. First, it's time-consuming. For example, you might get daily emails that say, "We're updating our terms," and then they direct you to pages of text that no one has time to read. A report by NordVPN says it would take 47 hours to read the privacy policies of the website a person typically visits in a month. That's essentially one work week of your life. Second, online privacy is confusing. You can encounter multiple messages a day that say, "We value your privacy," and each asks you to agree to vague terms that don't seem to mean anything. And last, but definitely not least, online privacy today feels like it traps you into having no real options. Let's take the case of Zoom last year. In a controversial privacy policy update, Zoom said, "Hey, to use Zoom, you're agreeing that Zoom owns your meeting recordings and any files that you share during a meeting. That means we can look at all that meeting data we took from you and use it however we want." People really didn't like this. When you think of all the things you might use Zoom for, this policy can feel very invasive. So Zoom backtracked and adjusted its policy. But this power dynamic isn't uncommon. A lot of the time, most people feel like all they can do is give in. Because what are you going to do? Not use the internet? That all being said, companies clearly aren't doing nothing about privacy. They're just not doing enough. According to one report, 76% of users believe that companies should be doing more to protect their data online. Right now, online privacy feels like an afterthought, but it really shouldn't, because 81% of users believe that the way a company treats their personal data shows how the company views them as a customer. So for tech companies, being privacy forward adds value to your business. And as tech companies, we do have the tools in our toolbox to make the experience of privacy much easier for our users. The good news is that designing products with privacy and safety in mind doesn't require a completely new way of working. Every tech company has its own product design process, but they typically all have phases of user research, product requirements, and design and development. To make sure privacy isn't just an afterthought, we can stack certain habits onto the way we already work. I can share 3 UX habits that we layer into these phases at Block Party to design for privacy. If your company doesn't already have its own approach to designing for privacy, maybe these habits can serve as inspiration for starting to develop one. UX and product design start way before pixels and code. That's why the first habit isn't actually about UI. It's to take a step back and listen for users' safety and privacy concerns. If you're familiar with the steps for design thinking, the very first step is empathy, and that's essentially what this step is. The other two habits for privacy are important, but you can't really do them well without this one. It's not always clear what companies could be designing beyond privacy policies and opt-in messages, but that's where user research comes in. Having the right feedback from users will show you their unmet privacy needs, where and why they need more protection. And it's not always the places that you think. Let's talk about one example. In our product privacy party, when used with Facebook, the extension can automate making all of your photo albums private in one go. We know this level of photo protection is an unmet privacy need because we talk to users about their concerns when using social media platforms. One user told us about what she needed on social media after being harassed online. She said, "I wanted to protect myself and my kids. I was posting a lot of pictures of my kids, but I stopped doing that and then I locked down. I feel like Facebook is particularly terrible at helping you adjust your settings at scale. It's really hard to go through and click all the things you need to. I didn't want to go in and click private on all of that. Yeah, I have time, but not that much time. What a waste of precious human moments." If you haven't changed Facebook photo album settings in a while, there are at least 6 clicks to find before you can make just one album private. Multiply that times however many albums you actually want to make private, it's really painful. Other users we talked to had different privacy concerns where this pain would come up too. Some users were professionals like teachers, healthcare workers, job seekers, and their privacy concern was their professional reputation, especially how they showed up online through photos. There was also a parent we talked to who had a child who identified as non-binary, and that parent's privacy concern was cleaning up her own photos and posts so it wouldn't unintentionally affect her child later on. Through talking to these users, it was very clear that there was an unmet privacy need for this kind of photo control and protection that saves time and effort. So how can companies get feedback like this? In the example we just looked at, we found a moment of worry. To look for moments of worry, we can ask users to recall when they've been worried about someone getting their data from our products. Next, it helps to understand hesitations. We can observe people using our products, see where they hesitate to give information, and ask them about why. And one more thing we can do is co-creation. We can invite users to describe new solutions that might help them protect their privacy better. These worries, hesitations, and solutions that people describe can help us better picture what users' privacy concerns are and where they might show up. Our second UX habit for privacy is to decide on data needs purposefully in a way that's balanced with our product's value. There's so much data that tech companies can and do collect. Things like personal information, insight into your personal files, your activity across the internet, location data, data that can help uniquely identify you, your device data, and publicly available info like news about you that they can connect all of this information to. But companies don't always need this amount nor specificity of data for people to get value from their products. Let's take a look at search engines, for example. Many by default track all your past searches, including all the embarrassing ones. Many also track your activity all over the internet. They do this to build a profile on you, and then they show you search results based on that profile. A lot of the time, they might also share what you're searching for with others for purposes like advertising. We kind of accept this as the cost of personalization, and it can be worth it for some people. But is it worth it all the time? Not necessarily. For example, if today you decided to search for best restaurants in Austin, did the search engine really need to be tracking you and your activity all this time to give you a helpful answer? You can test this out for yourself by searching with a privacy-protecting search engine like DuckDuckGo, which doesn't track you at all. Chances are you'll still be able to find a great answer. At Block Party, we make decisions not just about the amount of data we collect, but also the specificity of it. In our product privacy party, we give users privacy recommendations for different social media platforms. We want to personalize the recommendations and platforms we show you based on different data. For example, geolocation, since certain platforms are more or less relevant depending on where you are, and certain recommendations change based on your location. To learn about users' locations, many tech products collect a user's IP address. If you're not using something to hide it, an IP address is pretty specific to you and the devices you use. From it, a company can tell your zip code or, in combination with other data, track your online activity. At Block Party, we intentionally decided not to collect IP address and instead collect time zone as a broader alternative for geolocation. We simply don't need IP address level access to our users' locations and activity. Decisions like these are how we preserve users' privacy, hopefully also earning their trust along the way, especially as a brand they might not know yet. So some helpful checkpoints for deciding on data needs purposefully are, first, do we collect just enough data? To offer value with our product, how much data do we really need? How specific does it really need to be? Second, is how we treat people's data truly trustworthy? When we tell them what we do with their data, can we earn and keep users' trust? And third, are we handling people's data with care? Are we collecting, processing, and storing their data in a secure way? For more on this topic, you can check out the principles of privacy by design and data minimization. The last of the 3 UX habits is to give users agency by tying together transparency, control, and value. When Tracy talked about her experience being stalked, the advice she got was that knowing you have agency can change your mindset. When you feel exposed or threatened, one thing that can make you feel safe is your own power to take action and draw your own boundaries. These are things companies can offer through a user experience, specifically through transparency and control. It's not enough to just say to users, hey, data collection is happening. It's really also very important to say, and here's what you can do about it. Here are 2 quick examples of agency or privacy in action. In Google's monthly timeline email, they give you a snapshot of your travels and some feel-good highlights all based on tracking your location all the time. At the very top, it states how they have all this data on you. Then there's also clear info about what's in your control. You're able to view, edit, or delete your location history at any time. And there's a button that takes you to your controls. Also plainly in sight is the value you might get out of it, the snapshot of your travels. Instead of being confused about how Timeline knows so much about you, you know how, you see what you can do, and you see what you get out of it. This combination respects you to make the decision for yourself about whether your location history being tracked to this level of detail is actually worth it to you. As a different example, in our Ascension Privacy Party, the privacy recommendations we offer are specifically designed to show users their own agency on social media. Each recommendation gives you transparency about what's happening with your data and relevant potential trade-offs. They also present controls that you have, including an additional level of control that automates finding and fixing privacy settings for you. Here's what one user told us about their typical online privacy experience versus using Privacy Party. Pretty frequently, you get these emails that are like, hey, we're making an adjustment to our terms and conditions. So now I have to go through and read 30 to 40 pages of terms and conditions, which is all lawyer speak, which I'm not good at, and I can go into the privacy page and check it out. But the one thing I really liked about Privacy Party was when I installed it, you all were like, hey, here's the 10 things you need to do. Do you want to do this, yes or no? And then I could basically take that digested information and make a decision. Or if I needed to learn more, I could. I'm not saying I'm lazy, but terms and conditions are brutal to read. And we know this user is definitely not lazy because earlier we talked about how reading privacy policies could take you an entire work week. So to design the feeling of agency into a user experience, first, we can use transparency. Second, we can give users control. And third, we can tie both of these together with value. Putting all 3 in the same place at the right time allows people to make their own privacy decisions. If you're interested in a deeper look at these best practices, a great place to start is an article by Robert Stribley on designing for privacy. So here's a recap of our 3 UX habits for privacy and how they help. Through listening for concerns, we learn where users don't feel safe and why. By deciding with purpose, we balance data needs and product value to earn users' trust. And third, by crafting agency, we create an experience of online privacy that makes it easier for users to make their own decisions about their data. If you're building privacy into your products in other ways, we'd love to hear about them, so we can learn from you too. You can add or DM us at blockpartyapp_ on social media. Now that we've done an in-depth look at what you can do about privacy and safety as you build products, Tracy's going to come back onto the stage to summarize what we've discussed so far and what else you can do. Then we'll take Q&A.
Stay up here. Okay. So the first thing we talked about today was who cares? Turns out it's me, it's probably you, and it's lots of other people too. As a result, there's already a lot of privacy legislation, and safety legislation is starting to roll out as well, though much more remains to be done. One through line that's worth drawing out is that of user agency. Not only that you, as an individual, have agency, but that the solution to a lot of online harms will come via increasing user agency. We've explored a few different things that you can do to be proactive. Starting from the easiest, you can exert agency in your own day-to-day. It doesn't have to take more than 5 minutes. You can use tools like Privacy Party, Permission Slip, and Delete Me to express your preferences and exercise your rights. Stepping it up a little, you can bring UX habits for privacy into your work. Whether you're a hands-on product builder or an organizational leader, there's a lot of opportunity here to implement these habits that Deonne has shared with us today. The next suggestion can be easy or hard. You can take 5 minutes to call or email your elected representatives to tell them you care about privacy and safety, that you want open APIs and a robust safety tech ecosystem, that you support bills that are already being debated. Or you can get even more involved in helping to propose and draft legislation, particularly if you have a more technical background. It can help to ensure that regulation is written in a way that it will actually be effective. This may take years, but you're helping to shape the future of the internet, and it's a worthy cause. Last idea, because who are we to stop you from big moves if you want to make them? You can take on trust and safety as a career and dedicate your professional life to this work. Why not? Especially if you have perspectives and lived experiences that you wish were better reflected in the technology that we use every day. Putting on my old hat of diversity activist, I'll hit that point again. One obvious, necessary step to building better technology is making sure that we have diverse representation involved in that process. I was inspired to build Block Party and Privacy Party from solving my own pain points around privacy and safety. I hope to see many other people choosing a similar path to bring about the world that they want to see. With that, we are open to Q&A. All right. Okay, at the top we have, how do you prevent deepfake attacks that violate women's security? What is possible legislation? Okay, this is a tough question. There are a bunch of different approaches. I think on the legislative side, criminalizing those types of attacks is pretty obvious and something that we should do. Like, you shouldn't be allowed to do that and not have to face any consequences. On the technical side, there are trust and safety teams that are working with the developers of this technology, but ultimately you're kind of hoping that people will do the right thing. From a personal defense side, it's not going to be perfect, but you can also lock down what images are out there. We have heard from female journalists, unfortunately, who have dealt with these attacks that they don't post photos of themselves online anymore. Only one headshot of them looking to the side. Make sure everything else is locked down just to reduce that surface area of attack. Okay, next question. As a European, you're basically proposing GDPR guidelines in a market where this is not yet enforced. What needs to be done to make GDPR default in the US? Not fully sure I understand this question, but I guess 2 comments. First is that the major tech company players are already respecting GDPR. So if you talk to the folks at Google or like the New York Times, they were all implementing GDPR in 2016 when all the regulations came into force. There are some smaller, local, more regional websites potentially that don't comply with GDPR because they don't serve a European audience. But I think over time, they're all starting to become compliant, especially with US side legislation. So with California's Consumer Privacy Act, which is very similar to GDPR, even if you're in the States, if you want to serve people in California, you need to respect CCPA. So I think some of this is just going to happen over time. There's also better tooling. There are more companies that help you with implementing better data protections. And I guess the last piece is probably just like, if people care, if individuals vote with their feet and make these choices that signal to companies that they care, it makes the companies want to do those things as well. All right. We have a question on personalization. How do you think about balancing personalization with privacy? I'll comment a little bit and then maybe have Deonne comment as well. When we think about personalization, it's something that is hopefully very valuable to the end user. So what we're trying to figure out is this set of trade-offs around what is that value we're providing to people and what are people going to prioritize. If you have a completely privacy-preserving product that knows nothing about the users, and the experience is just not going to be that good either, and not that good for them. So we're thinking about also like, how do we ultimately serve the best interests of our users? And we try to be respectful around how much of that data we need and how good of an experience we can give them with that data.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a level of control that we can give to users inside of different products. So I know when we talked about it, okay, think about the amount or specificity of data, but there's also just being transparent with users about how much data you want to collect, maybe giving them some varying levels of control along the way in their experience. So maybe it's not so binary as we only collect this amount, we only collect this specificity, but maybe accommodating just different levels of personalization and letting people make the decision about the trade-offs that they're going to experience with your product.
All right, next question. Does blocking people and moderating heavily have the adverse outcome of fueling platforms like 8chan and 4chan where hate and violence thrive? I think there's this misconception that mass blocking causes more issues when actually it's often just a protective mechanism. If there are these little pockets on the internet where people are awful and congregate, yes, that is bad, but it's better when they don't have access to a wide platform. There have been a lot of discussions, more of the research communities looking at what is the value of these very large global spaces versus smaller niche communities. Why not just all go into local communities? That seems healthier, safer, nicer. But then you look at the value of the big platforms, being able to reach people that are not in your community. From my previous work as an activist, I needed to get out there. I needed to speak to people who were not already on board, maybe with some of the messages I had to share. And so it's those really big platforms that can be cross-cutting that are really important. If you can block off the most noxious people from those platforms and prevent them from getting access and attacking people who have voices that we should be hearing, I think net-net we're still helping the overall ecosystem. See. We have a question here about how do you think education has to change to create better digital citizens? I'm curious some of your thoughts on this. We've done actually quite a bit of user research recently with parents and helping their kids come online. So we've heard that this is a pain point, that they wish their kids had better education in schools. There's a few components of this. I think there's just overall awareness and curriculum that needs to start getting built in. I think there needs to be, people used to talk about, does everybody need to learn how to code? Now with AI, people are like, no, you don't have to. But this idea of literacy, digital literacy, how the technology works, I think is still very important. We need mental models for how things work to be able to interact with them well. So I think not necessarily teaching everybody how to code, but understanding how is a website put together, what is an algorithm? One of my biggest pet peeves is people complaining about the algorithm when they clearly do not know what an algorithm is. It's just very useful to know what these different component parts are, to know how to interact with them, and then also understand where the potential levers for change are.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this one a little bit, and as Tracy mentioned, we do talk to quite a few parents to learn how they teach their kids to be online. And they come up with such interesting rules to just sort of be thought experiments for their kids. One that someone talked to us about was, she said, she told her daughter when she first started using Instagram to you can't delete anything if you post anything. And it was in order to teach her how to just know that once you put something out there on the internet, it isn't necessarily something that you can control once it's exposed. And I think just having those kinds of moments with your children, I think can be really, really helpful and powerful ways of just teaching them how the internet really works and how they might not only behave for themselves, but even like protect other people.
Okay, a question on business models. How should we think about addressing data selling as a business model? It was a very complex question. Okay. First, I think there should be better legislation, more in the protecting data rights and privacy rights side of things. But beyond that, if we start talking more about the capitalist side of things, I do want to step back and observe that so many of the issues that we experience now are due to the business model. And we can ask companies to do better, but ultimately, if their corporate business interests are in selling data or increasing engagement or whatever it is that we find so problematic, if their business interests lead them in a certain way, even if you have wonderful people who are very ethical, moral within the company who are fighting for trust and safety and trying to help protect users, the overall currents are going to steer them towards doing the things that are antithetical to user interest because of the business side. How do we solve that problem? I don't think anybody has obvious answers, because you're also up against the fact that a lot of people don't want to pay for things. So there is now a little bit of that meme of, if you're not paying for a product, then you are the product. There is that increasing awareness, but you can't always have all the things at the same time. You can't have great free software and never pay anything and expect that they're never going to make money on you in some way. So it could be that consumers have to choose to not use those services, or it could be choosing to pay for things if you find value in them instead of expecting that everything is free. It takes a lot of money to operate businesses and hire software engineers and designers to thoughtfully build software for you. I don't know. Any other thoughts on business model side?
Nothing to add.
Okay. One last thing, just talking about the incentives and alignment. When I was thinking of starting Block Party, I was looking structurally at the incentives, and people asked me if I might be able to just do some of these things within a big tech company. And I felt that it was more powerful structurally to be outside of those companies and to be building on behalf of the end users, as opposed to within a big company having to serve the goals of the larger corporation, which is probably revenue through ads. And this position as a third party aligned with the end users and eventually charging for our products forces us to have a higher standard around the quality of the products we're building, the value we're giving to users, such that they are willing to pay for it. There's questions where people want things to be free, like why should I have to pay? But again, if we think about aligning those interests, like if you want stuff that works for you in your interest, then sometimes you have to indicate that with the money. Let's see. How do you feel about the safety concerns around TikTok and the legislation being debated on it? Okay, I don't have a great opinion on what's happening with TikTok. It is amusing to watch TikTok trying to tell people to go talk to the legislators. I do think there are a number of where the traditional safety issues have been discussed around particularly kids using social media around addiction and screen time. I think some of the other issues may be overblown. It's hard to really tell, particularly around political issues, like is there really a bias in the algorithms or is this being hyped up? I think first we need more transparency around what's happening. What we saw when not only Twitter but Reddit shut down their APIs last year, it was that researchers don't have enough access to understand what's truly happening on platforms to even be able to measure what the harms are. So if we want to do something, we first need to understand what's going on, and the lack of API access means that we're reliant on the companies themselves self-reporting what is happening, which does not make for the best information to be trying to create solutions around. And we also need better APIs to allow people to control their own experience. TikTok, probably more than any of the other platforms, is famous for its algorithm, where followers don't matter as much as just the feed. But that is fully controlled by the company itself. And so whatever they want to do to manipulate it, like, it's up to them. Individuals have no control. I think that is something that's very important to try to drive home here. Like, we need people to have more control over their experience. I sometimes liken it to, if you take an analog experience, like if I go to the grocery store, there will often be tabloid magazines near the checkouts because they want me to buy those. I look at them and then don't buy them because I don't want to read trashy things. My Facebook algorithm has decided they want to show me every single thing happening with the royal family in Britain. It's like I don't get the choice to say, like, I don't want to actually read that, even if my eyes linger there a little bit too long. Like, I don't want that. But I have no control over the Facebook algorithm. TikTok, if I click on something or spend a little bit too long looking at something, it just starts showing me more and more of the same thing, and I have no control over that. I want to be able to have that choice. We'll say, like, no, even if I let my eyes linger on that tablet a little bit too long, like, please don't show me any more of those things. Like, I want to opt into something that I know is better for my edification and my mental health. Okay, accepting cookies on every website is time-consuming and confusing. Could you create a product that would get rid of them but still caters to user security? I think there are actually browser extensions out there that will help you do this. And maybe something's built into Firefox. The way it would happen technically is just like you have something that's clicking on behalf of you. So anytime you see those cookie banners, go into the manage, and then there's probably some set of controls that you can choose by default, which is like only the necessary cookies and everything else you reject. Yeah, I think that some of those things are out there. Try searching. Let me know if you find a good one. Okay. What is your opinion on using blockchain to issue unique ID for individual online presence for more accountability and circumvent the anonymity of bad actors? Okay, this is a very interesting question. This is not exactly the same as blockchain, but in the UK, there's been a big push, in some other places as well, but in the UK, I've heard this a lot. People want to get rid of anonymity and force all users online to have linked like a government ID or something that prevents what they view as like the terribleness of allowing people to post things without them attached to their name. While anonymity does, I think, allow people to sometimes act more poorly than they would otherwise, there are a lot of trade-offs there around not allowing any anonymity anymore. For example, whistleblowers or people who are speaking out and need to do so anonymously for their own protection, particularly in authoritarian regimes. So getting rid of anonymity altogether may not solve the problem fully, and it will introduce a bunch of other issues. So just with that concept, like, okay, if we bring it back to blockchain, we could try to do that, but I think it's just questionable that it would ultimately lead to better results. I've seen plenty of people harassing me on LinkedIn tied to their professional identity, so clearly that's not going to solve all the problems. What are your thoughts on enforcing age restrictions online as it relates to privacy and safety? What's the role of parents, schools, and legislators? I think it makes sense to have different protections for younger folks who may not be fully capable of understanding what it means to be online and all of the different data issues potentially. I think there are questions, again, in implementation. So some of the approaches that have been proposed around enforcing age restrictions are that you have to submit your government ID, which, again, goes back to those problems. Like, there are people who need to be anonymous and not really sure that you want to have scans of everybody's government IDs as a tech company. There's potential like other security issues that makes them more of a target. Some of the legislation now that's being debated is a little tricky as well, because especially for kids in that age range where they're starting to develop their own identity and maybe are in families that are not as supportive of how they might choose to live, it's very important that they can find these additional resources and communities online, particularly around like the LGBTQ questions. And so it's not always better to have parents be the ones supervising everything that's happening, but there's gradations of it as kids grow up and become adults. Like, as they're developing in that maturity, they should be able to have more privacy and autonomy. There's no bright lines. I think a lot of this is the sort of stuff that we have to discuss and figure out where the nuance is and try our best to create policies that are overall useful, even if they're not always going to be perfect in every scenario. Let's see. What technology do you use to support real/fake and truth/falsehoods online? Oh, this is an interesting question. I personally don't use any technology for this, besides I try to use common sense and I don't know, like on platforms like Twitter or X, like I try to read the replies underneath to see if there's any fact checking happening. It's really hard. Like, there's people working on this problem, especially now with deepfake technology being so good and accessible. I think these are systemic issues we need to solve when the whole information ecosystem is polluted with fake information. It's a problem for everybody. It shouldn't have to be a burden on every individual to be able to sort out what's real and fake. It'd be much better if there were system level fixes, but it's difficult to get there. There's the challenges of like opt-in versus opt-out solutions. Like, if we wanted to have all videos be time-stamped and watermarked with like a proof of authenticity, that would be great, but you're going to have all these people still creating videos that are not that, and then so we still end up with this problem of, unless everybody is forced to opt into the system, you still have the uncertainty. If anybody has solutions to this, please let me know. I've been thinking on this for a while, because it has a lot of ramifications, especially as we think about an election year. Not just in the US, but there's a lot of elections happening all around the world this year. Deepfakes are a problem in our information ecosystem. Social media addiction can lead to compulsive and impulsive activity online. What are your thoughts about protecting people from themselves online? Okay, we can wrap up on this one. I think it's instructive to look at some of the tools that are already out there. So there's the screen time controls that people have. There's even things like turning your phone to black and white because it's a little bit less engaging. I think it's useful to have these different tools for folks just to help them enforce their own boundaries, like if they know that it's going to be difficult. But ultimately, I think a lot of it has to be from people themselves, like wanting to do better. You can't just rely on technology to do all the things to change how you want to be as a person. Like, you have to also put in that effort to think about what you really want and what effort you're willing to put into it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Deonne?
No, I totally agree. I think, yeah, a reason all of these tools are created is because it helps you investigate what your boundaries actually are and to enforce them, even if you have to do it for yourself. But yeah, there's a little bit of like training your own behavior too as well. Yeah.
We've heard from some folks, we've actually heard all sorts of things that people have tried to protect themselves from potential harms online. There's like deleting the accounts and then reactivating them later when you need them, deleting the apps from your phone and only using on desktop. I guess it's helpful to like share those different tips that people can take. I think it's very similar to like other types of bad activity or things that you feel like you should not do. Like for me, I like snacking a lot more than I should, so I try to not keep snacks in the house. It just makes things a little bit easier for me. But I think a lot of this is just like basic behavior stuff. I guess to tie it all back together to our talk and some of the principles we've been talking about in technology design, there are things that technology builders can do to make it a little bit easier, like build in some of these controls, which we're already starting to see around screen time, make things easier to do in the way that you want. But it still has to come down to people. Technology cannot solve all people problems. I think that is all for time. Thank you so much all for being here.